North to south. North to south. Mr. Douglas. North to south. Coast to coast. Around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings. My name is John David Wells. What do we do on this broadcast? We report the news. Honestly. Fairly. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. I make commentary. That's not news. It's just my opinion. Just as valuable as yours. And so we debate. All of the first three. News, analysis, commentary, debate is what we do on the Wells Report. Welcome to the broadcast. It's good to have you here. So this has been an amazing run of days for those people who have been paying very close attention to one of the biggest and probably one of the most amazing human constructs in our lifetimes. And that is social media, and specifically Twitter. And we are going to be talking about Twitter coming up in just a little bit. That's going to be in our second hour of the Wells Report. We've been watching the, shall we say, opening up of some of the things that have been kept hidden by Twitter for years and years. The catalyst, of course, Elon Musk. Elon Musk has been doing this because he took over the company, took it private. It is his company, and he wanted people to know the transparency behind the non-transparency of what was alleged as people being shadow banned and flat censored. That'll be in our second hour. This hour, on the other hand, well, this is about the Supreme Court of the United States hearing a case to determine whether or not a business owner's, take two. The Supreme Court is looking at a case that will determine whether or not a business owner can pursue their First Amendment religious rights when it comes to people who are outside of their particular religious beliefs, ask for their services. And this is something that has happened before. If it seems familiar, that's because it is. Years ago, 2015, a spontaneous celebration erupted outside the Supreme Court. Now, this is from USA Today, as they report this story. A slim majority of justices legalized same-sex marriage across the nation. Gay pride flags spilled into the court plaza. Inside the courtroom, some members of the audience wept and embraced as the gravity of the court decision came into focus. Now, 7 years later, the High Court begins to consider another case implicating same-sex marriage. The mood among supporters of LGBTQ rights is far less jubilant. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments today in a case involving a Colorado designer who wants to decline to create wedding websites for same-sex couples because those marriages fly in the face of her religious beliefs. The outcome would have profound implications for state anti-discrimination laws, as well as the First Amendment. After a landmark victory in the same-sex marriage case and another win in 2020 that banned workplace discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, the outlook for LGBTQ rights at the Supreme Court has dimmed in recent years, according to USA Today. This is biased, and so we are pointing that out. Especially in suits like this one filed by a website designer that involves conflicts with religious freedom. Last year, the High Court sided with a Catholic foster care agency in Philadelphia that declined to consider same-sex couples as clients. And in its decision in June to overturn Roe v. Wade, Associate Justice Clarence Thomas suggested it may also be a time to reconsider same-sex marriage, a notion that prompted a political backlash and bipartisan legislation that would require states to recognize those marriages. Things move very quickly with this court, said Mary Bonato. She is a senior director of civil rights and legal strategies with GLBTQ legal advocates and defenders, who stress that many of the recent losses for LGBTQ Americans at the courts have been narrow. Still, she acknowledged it's hard not to be worried about where the court is going. For advocates such as Bonalto, in the case 303 Creative versus Alenis, represents a broader threat to anti-discrimination laws that regulate public businesses such as retail stores, hotels, restaurants, After all, if a business may decline to create a website for an LGBTQ couple based on an objection to same-sex marriage, couldn't it also decline to make a birthday cake for a Catholic family or an interracial one? Colorado, like 24-hour states, no, that would be 24 other states, prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation by businesses. There's a civil rights settlement as we see it, where the court has been very clear in a number of cases that your preferences, your belief, your faith does not or do not countermand the obligation of non-discrimination. This really threatens to disrupt that. But those supporting 303 creative owner Lori Smith say an important First Amendment principle is at stake. Smith's sites are a form of speech, not a cookie-cutter product designed for sale. The government, her supporters say, shouldn't be able to force her to create a site endorsing a marriage she opposes. If a city bans discrimination based on political affiliation, for example, could the court punish a musician for refusing to play a Republican campaign rally if that same musician regularly performs for Democrats? Dale Carpenter, a law professor at SMU Dedman School of Law, said a loss for Smith could lead to a dilution of the freedom of speech, which he has noted has been a crucial tool for minority cases, including LGBTQ advocates. Carpenter supports same-sex marriage, but submitted a brief with other law professors supporting Smith's position. It's important to have equality and anti-discrimination, said Carpenter, but it's important to balance that against rights of free speech and expression for those with whom we disagree. Carpenter dismisses the idea the court is retrenching from its 2015 precedent in Obergefell versus Hodges that legalized same-sex marriage. On the contrary, he said, opponents of the same-sex marriage law or decision have been forced by that decision and public opinion to concede defeat. The debate has now shifted to the implications of that reality. Obergefell is probably more secure. We're gradually feeling our way to a settlement that is workable, fair, and preserves strong interests of both sides. We will very likely have a decision on this next year. For religious groups backing Smith, the case represents something like a do-over. 4 years ago, a 7-2 majority of the Supreme Court sided with a Colorado baker who refused to create a custom wedding cake for a same-sex couple. But that decision was focused narrowly on how the state's Civil Rights Commission treated the baker, Jack Phillips. The court did not rule on a broader question about whether to draw the line between the business owner's religious freedom and LGBTQ rights. That lack of clarity on that question has led to other lawsuits, including from a florist in Washington state who declined to create an arrangement for a same-sex wedding. The Supreme Court declined to hear that case last year. Smith, who is being represented by the same group that backed Phillips, asked the Supreme Court to decide whether Colorado's requirement violated her First Amendment right to exercise her religion without government interference, as well as her right to free speech. The High Court limited its review to only the speech question. A 3-judge panel of the Denver-based U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit last year ruled against Smith. The court agreed that her websites are a form of speech. It also found that the state's anti-discrimination law compelled Smith to create speech that celebrated same-sex marriage. But in a 2-1 ruling, the court said Colorado had an interest in preventing discrimination and ensuring equal access to goods and services. So it upheld Colorado's law. Chief Justice John Roberts predicted such lawsuits between LGBTQ Americans and religious business owners. For millions of Americans, the court's 2015 ruling in Obergefell reflected an evolution the nation had already undergone in its views regarding same-sex marriage. But Roberts, one of 4 justices who dissented in the case, warned of the potential for conflicts with business owners like Smith. Since 2015, 2 of the associates in the Obergefell majority, Anthony Kennedy and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, have been replaced by more conservative successors. Hard questions arise when people of faith exercise religion in ways that may seem to conflict with the new right to same-sex marriage, said Roberts. There is little doubt that these and similar questions will soon be before this court. And so they are. And so, the court is now trying to consider exactly what is going on with regard to where the First Amendment stops and the LGBTQ right to same-sex marriage begins. This is fascinating. And it does have broad implications. Because in my view, someone does have, even if they own a business of their own, someone does have the right to be able to uphold their beliefs in their religion and in other things that are guaranteed by the Bill of Rights. Don't you agree, or don't you agree? Telephone number is 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. What do you think? This was something that I've been talking about for a while. I was and remain extremely interested in various ways that our laws and our rights come in conflict with each other. This is something that is very, very difficult to deal with, which is why we have a Supreme Court. But every time there is something along this line, there is yet another small piece of the definition of, say, for example, the First Amendment right of religious freedom, or anything else, that this new nuance, this new part of that definition can also create other arguments that are going to be heard by the court later on. It's something that I think is part of the turbulence that occurs when things change. I've talked about it during the Roe v. Wade debate. Roe v. Wade changed a bunch of things, but it took a long time for everybody to settle around, not just from a legal standpoint, but a societal one as well. It took a long time for people to find an equilibrium. And that's where we are with regards to same-sex marriage. I don't think anybody really has any problem with people marrying each other. My only problem with same-sex marriage is the word marriage. And that has something to do with religion. To me, marriage is a religious sacrament. And so if I had been on the Supreme Court, I would have tried to define it as such, a religious sacrament that goes with a particular religion and therefore is protected by the First Amendment. Now, if this was a case where, say, for example, someone was looking for us, and this is where I differ, if someone was seeking a civil union, then I could possibly see that the civil union would be different. A civil union would have the protections of the laws that Colorado is seeking to implement, wouldn't it? And even that leaves debate open. Our telephone number, 817-379-2172. Steve Zimmerman. Z, what are you doing? How are both of you? How are all the Zimmermans? How's your dad? How's Eric? How's everybody doing? It's one of the cool things about having people, jump in that it becomes more of a family, doesn't it? It's good to have you here, Steve. Thanks very much for joining us. This is the Wells Report. Stick around. More coming up in just a couple of minutes. The news and more next. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Welcome to the broadcast. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. The chat room is humming, and you are welcome to join us. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. If you're watching on Patreon and or Rumble, and I think I'm trying to set up Substack. So if you're watching on Substack or any of those other two, Rumble and Patreon, this show was recorded earlier today. So if you want to get in touch and if you want to say something, if you want to have a comment or what have you, send me an email. thewellsreport@frontier.com. thewellsreport@frontier.com. In the subject line, make sure you put the platform in which you are watching so I know it's you. Thanks very much for joining us. So we're talking a little bit about the Supreme Court hearing a case about a web designer who, as CNN Politics calls it, doesn't want to work with same-sex couples. It's not quite that simple. Not quite that simple. What she is trying to do is protect her First Amendment religious rights. And according to CNN and Adriana DeVogue, she is a CNN Supreme Court reporter. She believes that several Supreme Court conservative members seem sympathetic to the arguments of a graphic designer who is seeking to start a website business to celebrate weddings, but does not want to work with same-sex couples. Now, once again, this is writing that's from CNN. It is biased, all right? The conservative justices viewed the case through the lens of speech and suggested that an artist or someone creating a customized product could not be forced by the government to express a message that violates their religious beliefs. Justice Neil Gorsuch noted that a business person's objection would not be based on the status of the same-sex couple, but instead the message the business person did not want to send. The question isn't the who, said Gorsuch, but the what. Justice Amy Coney Barrett told a lawyer for the designer that her strongest ground is the designer's work is custom. On one side of the dispute is the designer, Lori Smith, whose business is called 303 Creative. She says she has not yet moved forward with an expansion into wedding websites because she's worried about violating a Colorado public accommodations law. She says the new law compels her to express messages that are inconsistent with her beliefs. The state and supporters of LGBTQ rights respond that Smith is simply seeking a license to discriminate in the marketplace. They said the law covers a business person's conduct, not their speech. The case comes as supporters of LGBTQ rights fear the 6-3 conservative majority, fresh off of its decision to reverse a 50-year-old abortion precedent, Roe v. Wade, may be setting its sights on ultimately reversing the landmark 2015 opinion called Obergefell v. Hodges that cleared the way for same-sex marriage nationwide. Justice Clarence Thomas, for example, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, explicitly called on the court to revisit Obergefell, not because Clarence Thomas is against same-sex marriage, but that the court conveyed a right that requires a constitutional amendment, which is not in the court's purvey. You cannot create a right out of thin air in a courtroom. You just can't do that. And this is one thing that the mainstream media is refusing to point out. This is not about whether somebody gets to marry somebody else based on love and what have you. What this is about is that the Constitution of the United States creates a tripartite government. In other words, legislative, executive, judicial. And there are checks and balances on each of those branches' powers. And the court, the judicial branch, cannot create something that is reserved for the legislative branch. That would be a constitutional amendment. And that's what that was all about. It's been turned into, some sort of morality-based crusade by conservative members of the Supreme Court to change the sociology of the United States, which is not the case. What the Supreme Court is trying to do and what those justices were trying to do with the Dobbs decision was simply return to the constitutional mandate of the judicial branch of our Constitution. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks for being with us today as we discuss the Supreme Court taking a look at whether or not someone who does web design should be forced against her religious beliefs to create a website for same-sex marriages. That's what's going on. In our coverage so far, we framed just exactly what was going on, and also allowed us out that the conservatives, according to one reporter from CNN, she believes that the conservative members of the court, in a 6-3 majority, seem to find some sympathy for the web designer. On the other hand, there are liberal members of the court, and Smith's lawyer, Christian Wagner, came under intense attack from those justices on the bench. They launched into a slew of hypotheticals meant to explore the potential sweeping consequences if the case would find in Smith's favor. They suggested other businesses could discriminate based on race or physical disability. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson asked about a photographer's booth at a mall that sought to capture the feelings of a bygone era, but only wanted white children to be photographed on Santa's lap. She pressed if the photographer could draw up a sign that said only white kids could participate. Justice Sonia Sotomayor repeatedly asked, "What is the limiting line?" and asked about those who were discriminated against based on interracial marriage or physical disability. Justice Elena Kagan noted that 2 of her clerks are currently engaged. She said wedding websites are made up of graphics and links to hotels that are not works of art. The House this week is expected to pass a bill that requires states to recognize another state's legal marriage if Obergefell were ever overturned. The bill would then go to the White House for President Joe Biden's signature. "I'm concerned," said Mary Bonato, the senior attorney of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, told CNN in an interview, "I'm concerned only because the court seems to be reaching for cases and literally changing settled law time and time again." 4 years ago, the court considered a similar case involving the Colorado baker that we spoke of. In a 7-2 ruling favoring the baker, it was tied to specific circumstances in that case, did not apply broadly to similar disputes nationwide. Now justices are taking a same look or a fresh look at the same state anti-discrimination law. Under that law, a business may not refuse to serve an individual because of their sexual orientation. Smith said that she's willing to work with all people regardless of their sexual orientation, but she refuses to create websites that celebrate same-sex marriage. "If the state of Colorado is forcing me to create custom, unique artwork communicating and celebrating a different view of marriage, a view of marriage that goes against my deeply held beliefs," that's what she says the state is doing. When the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, the justices sidestepped whether the law violated Smith's free exercise of religion. Instead, the court said it would look at the dispute through the lens of free speech and decide whether applying the public accommodations law to compel an artist to speak or stay silent violates the free speech clause of the First Amendment. What this does is this obviously opens up an opportunity where the other side of the question is going to be debated at some point or another. The religious aspect of the First Amendment. There are a lot of great questions going on. Whatever happened to "this business reserves the right to refuse service to anyone"? Good question. Absolutely a great question. And that is essentially what is being disputed here. Okay. Then Jesse asked this question. If the situation was reversed, would a quick Christian make such a huge deal about it or just take their business elsewhere? Well, it depends on the circumstances. Why are we going through this? Why is this happening? It really doesn't have anything to do with, in my view. Now, this is something, like I said, I've been thinking about this for a long time. And this crosses into the murky realm of what's called political science. So, the people that are working to change our nation have serious obstacles in that change. And one of them is the Bill of Rights. And you will note that what we're dealing with here, essentially, regardless of what you believe one way or another, is calling to question the First Amendment of our Constitution, in this case, freedom of speech. Now, we know that the left attacks the Second Amendment. The Fourth Amendment is all but gone. The Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, et cetera, depending on your point of view, is warped to a political imperative as opposed to a legal one. And once again, we still find the left assaulting, for all intents and purposes, freedom of speech. That's the first freedom. Now, remember, the court is backing away from the religious aspect of this because you think political science is murky. Wait until the court has to decide what the religious implications of some of this are. And that, by the way, is a check that they're writing. There will be a case that will be a landmark case before the Supreme Court that deals with religious freedom in these United States, which takes us back to why people who have strong-held beliefs, usually of a Christian nature, are constantly being bombarded with all kinds of laws and websites, laws and court expenses. Okay. Now, this is supposition on my part. This is my theory. As I said, the Constitution of the United States provides serious impediments to people trying to create a more powerful government. One of those is the Bill of Rights, and those rights are not extended by the government of the United States. Those rights are extended by God and recognized as such in the Constitution as being God-given rights. And they are unalienable. There can be no law put against them. But we keep seeing, and mostly from the left, laws being put against these rights to put a lien against them, which is unconstitutional. And in order to be able to change the concept of God-given rights into something that is more government-given, like, say, for example, the Constitution of France, God-given rights are unattackable. Government-given rights, well, are up for debate. And that's what we, the people of the United States, are both protected by and must be vigilant to protect. The fact that our rights come from God and not from a government. And the big attempt here is to try to make those rights government-given, to redefine them into something that puts them in a governmental purvey, as opposed to, like, for example, this law. Well, you see, that bracketing should not exist in a God-given right. You have the right to say what you choose to say. You have a right to your beliefs. You have a right to keep them absent interference from the state. And that's what's up for grabs here. And I have to note again that the Supreme Court is really not getting to the crux of the issue. And that fascinates me as well. So in order to change the country, you have to get rid of the Bill of Rights. In order to get rid of the Bill of Rights, you've got to get rid of the concept that these are God-given rights. In order to get rid of the concept of God-given rights, you have to attack religion. And once again, you have to cast religion into a picture of primitive beliefs and tribalism and craziness and racism, et cetera, in order to get rid of the basis of God-given rights, which is the perception given to us by religion. That is why Christians just find another place to get something done. And leftists go to court because they're fighting a different fight. They're fighting a completely different fight. That's the way I see it. That's what I see. What are your thoughts? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. So LGBTQ yeah, it just needs to create businesses that support their beliefs. Well, typically that's what they do. That's what the Irish did. It's what the Italians did. It's what the Germans did. It's what the Polish did. It's what everybody that came to this country did. They just created their own commerce. As a matter of fact, the Black Chamber of Commerce celebrated to this day, along with other chambers of commerce. But this is all something that comes from what was, I believe, a huge mistake from a human standpoint that created social structure based on discrimination of one form or another. That's why I say that racism is a crime against humanity. And it's not just a crime against those who are oppressed. It's a crime against all people. It's a crime against all people. Because of this willingness to discriminate based on somebody else's characteristics or somebody else's physical packaging or whatever else. What you do is you furnish a lever or a cudgel or a tool to punish those people, whether they took part in the original racism or not. These people are just trying to get along with their lives. And what's happening is that someone is trying to cast just getting along with your life as an egregious sin against somebody because you discriminate or you are racist or you are homophobic or you are this or that or something else. And there is a huge infrastructure in place to be able to back down people based on these particular concepts that are created by questions just like this. And it's very, very difficult to deal with because people say, so what's the big deal? This particular circumstance isn't necessarily a big deal. But a really good example came up last year. You know, the academy, the universities are slowly turning themselves into institutions of indoctrination as opposed to institutions of educational enlightenment. And what they keep doing and what they keep working on and so on is to slowly change everything regarding nominal fact, actual understandings of law, alter history, quell student debate, limit the amount of research material available in order to pursue a political ideology and to change things from a standpoint of, well, yeah, now we have a group of people that are getting out of college every year that are basically unhirable by people who believe in the American system. And yet, they continue to work on their particular political mission after their college days. And they continue to do this work. That's why we have the LGBTQ Anti-Defamation League, for want of a more accurate description. And that's why all of this stuff is we're constantly bombarded with it. But it all started because of the notion that a group of people were superior to another group of people based on all manner of different things. Instead of living and let live, what we've done is and religion is, this takes us right back to religion. Religion will point at certain people and say that you are sinners based on your life. Is that discrimination or is that religious freedom? And there is the crux of the entire question. At least in my view, and the Supreme Court is stepping aside from that in order to turn this into a free speech case. So in other words, what I'm trying to tell you is yeah, this is really important. Yes, and on a very narrow, straightforward thing, yeah, it's about whether a business owner has the right to provide their services under their belief system. I suspect the Supreme Court will probably find that 303 Creative has standing in this case and will probably fine for her. But believe me, the fight is not over, not anywhere close. And remember, as this unfolds after the decision next year, watch who talks about it and watch what they say about it, because that will be eye-opening. Yep. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We'll be back with more coming up in just a couple of minutes. Monday, the 5th of December. It's the Wells Report. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. I was just looking at some of the coverage of this. And apparently there was a little bit of humor flying around regarding this case. Justice Samuel Alito joked about Black Santa, children in Klan robes, and dating websites while the Supreme Court was hearing this case. Web designer Lori Smith of Colorado opposes same-sex marriage on religious grounds. She's seeking an exemption from a state law, and we've discussed that. During the arguments today, which included a series of tough hypothetical questions directed at both sides, Alito asked whether a Black Santa at the mall is obligated to take a picture with a child dressed up in a Ku Klux Klan outfit even if he doesn't want to. Eric Olson, the Colorado Solicitor General, arguing for the law, said that the Black Santa would not have to follow through with the request since KKK outfits are not protected characteristics under the accommodation laws, which, by the way, points out a huge flaw in the law, doesn't it? The law first defines what is something that can be discriminated against and then enforces that particular definition. Justice Elena Kagan is asked whether the same applies to regardless of whether the child is black or white or any other characteristic. Alito quipped, "You do see a lot of black children in Ku Klux Klan outfits, right? All the time." And people laughed. In another notable moment, Alito brought up a scenario where an unmarried Jewish person asks a Jewish photographer to take a picture for his account on JDate, describing the website as a dating service for Jewish people. Kagan, who, by the way, is Jewish, jumped in to confirm that Alito was correct, which drew laughter. Alito then joked that Kagan may also be familiar with the next website he mentioned, and that would have been, hold on a minute here, let's get back to what I was doing here, and I hit the wrong button on my flipping thing. Hang on a minute here. Nope. Oh. Shoot. Let me see if it's on NBC. Man, this drives me crazy. Here we go. Next, a Jewish person asks a Jewish photographer to take a photograph for his AshleyMadison.com website. That's an online dating service geared toward people seeking extramarital relationships, which also drew some laughter from the audience because he said he was wondering whether Justice Kagan was familiar with that. By the way, Alito then said, "I'm not suggesting that she knows a lot of things. I'm not suggesting that." Okay, does he have to do it? Conservative justice on the high court appeared sympathetic toward the web designer, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing that I could say on this is, once again, this opens a can of worms. And unless you're willing to eat worms, don't open up a can of worms. And here we are. By the way, the Supreme Court declined today to take up a case brought against Dominion Voting Systems and Facebook after the 2020 election by a group of voters who claimed the companies illegally influenced or interfered with the 2020 election. Lower courts had previously rejected the case, ruling the 8 voters lacked the procedural threshold, known as standing, to bring the lawsuit against parties, including the Center for Tech and Civic Life, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg, and his wife Priscilla Chan. The court's refusal to take up this case is no surprise. The lower courts threw it out because the plaintiffs don't have standing. And even if they did, their claims are frivolous, said Steve Vladek, the CNN Supreme Court analyst and professor at the University of Texas School of Law. Well, Justice Vladek, I can only say this. One, it's no surprise the courts threw it out because the plaintiffs didn't have standing. And then he opines, this is the professor himself saying, and even if they did, their claims are frivolous. Well, that's not your call, sir. That's your opinion. See how that works? Do you see how opinion can be used in news to make it news? Steve Vladek is the Supreme Court analyst and professor of the University of Texas School of Law. And so in this particular case of, quote, journalism, which it isn't, the lower courts threw it out because the plaintiffs didn't have standing, and even if they did, their claims are frivolous. Well, no, you don't get to say that, sir. All you get to report as a journalist is to say that the partisans, that the plaintiffs didn't have standing. Stop. Then you say, and in my opinion, even if they did, their claims are frivolous. You hear me do that all the time. The reason is I want to differentiate between news and opinion. Pity this University of Texas law professor didn't feel the same way. And while we're on the subject of Dominion Voting Systems, Lachlan Murdoch, he's the CEO of Fox Corporation, is expected to be deposed today. It's probably already going on. He is part of a $1.6 billion defamation lawsuit against Fox News for amplifying bogus claims that rigged machines from voting Dominion systems were responsible for the Trump defeat in 2020. Murdoch will be the most senior corporate figure within the Fox media empire to face questions under oath in the case so far. His appearance before Dominion's lawyers is a sign of how unexpectedly far and fast the lawsuit has progressed in recent weeks and how contentious it has become. All right. So that's the very latest. That is the very latest when it comes to the Supreme Court of the United States. Like I said, this particular decision will be rendered next year. I wonder what it will be. Coming up in the next hour of the Wells Report, you do not want to miss it. We're going to talk a little bit about Twitter. The Twitter files. What have they meant to the nation so far? Elon Musk promises smoking guns in the next set of Twitter files. And we'll explore that as we continue here on the Wells Report. This is Monday, the 5th of December. Back in a moment. Okay. Thanks very much for being with us, okay? We'll be back after this. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We bring you the news, honestly, fairly. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. I make commentary. That's not the news, just my opinion. Just as valuable as yours, and so we debate. News, analysis, commentary, and debate every single day. And we hope that you join us and find value in this broadcast and support it. I'll tell you how coming up later on this hour. So, Elon Musk is an agent of change. He was talking about electric vehicles long before anybody else was, and indeed built an amazing corporation to make those vehicles. He branched out into space. And he's branched out into communications. He does a lot of different things. He's arguably the new millennium's first genuine Renaissance man in this new context of the Renaissance. And he noticed something that conservatives had been talking about for a long time, that big tech media, social media, had been meddling in the political affairs of the people of the United States and had indeed violated the constitutional idea of free speech and free expression and had done so in a way that may indeed have interfered with our elections. And so what he did was he decided to purchase Twitter, which was one of the organizations conservatives have been yelling about for years. Fox News reports that conservatives, after doing all of that shouting, now have perhaps smoking gun proof to back it up. And in this particular article by Fox News, that was a reprint of a Buck Sexton editorial, there may indeed be information that is worse than conservatives thought. Yeah. So let me give you a little bit of background first. This is from USA Today. Elon Musk promoted a series of tweets last Friday that showed Twitter executives struggling with handling tweets surrounding a report on Hunter Biden's laptop before the 2020 presidential election, as the company took steps to block it. Elon Musk said this will be awesome, wrote before the release of what he called the Twitter files, a lengthy Twitter thread by journalist Matt Taibbi during a Taibbi that detailed internal documents that Musk had apparently given to him. Musk last month urged his followers to vote for Republicans, seeming to push the material to expose what he claims is the political left's grip over Twitter. Taibbi said that he had agreed to certain conditions to report on the story, but did not disclose what they were. USA Today was unable to verify the authenticity of the screenshots of emails and other documents that form the bulk of Taibbi's reporting. The White House is not commenting. The emails focus on the debate within Twitter whether censoring tweets promoting a 2020 New York Post article on Hunter Biden's laptop was the right call. The Post story provided sensitive information news organizations, including USA Today, could not verify at the time. Biden, his allies, and former intelligence officials said the story was likely Russian disinformation. However, then Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe said the emails targeting the younger Biden were not connected, even as federal authorities continued to review whether the material was part of such a campaign. According to Taibbi, Twitter blocked tweets from former Trump administration officials publicizing the article, prompting them to contact and admonish the company for their actions. Meanwhile, members of the Biden campaign reported specific tweets to Twitter and requested they be blocked. And they were. USA Today has since verified the contents of the reported tweets by the Biden campaign through open access tools, found they were pornographic in nature or alluded to Hunter Biden's sexual activities. Here's what the documents show and what they don't, according to USA Today. Now, remember, USA Today is, to a degree, involved in damage control. Because, once again, they took a journalistic track that said, well, we can't verify this, so we're not going to report it. Well, since then, we have found that those fears were unfounded because indeed this material is genuine. Taibbi's report reveals requests from President Joe Biden's campaign in the days before the 2020 election to remove tweets the campaign flagged. An email from a Twitter employee dated October 24th, 2020 includes 6 links to tweets. More to review from the Biden team, the employee wrote. Another Twitter worker replied, handled these. Taibbi goes on to write, requests from both Donald Trump's White House and the Biden campaign were received and honored. He does not provide examples of tweets the Trump team flagged to Twitter, or we don't know what happened to those either. This is important. Taibbi argues the system was not balanced because he said the majority of Twitter employees were Democrats. To make the case, he pointed to Twitter's team's significantly greater campaign contributions to Democrats over Republicans. Notably, Taibbi's reporting does not show the Biden campaign flagging the 2020 New York Post report that first revealed the existence of Hunter Biden's laptop. Now, what we have to point out is that the FBI has now pointed out that they had weekly meetings with all the big tech social websites and told them that this was very likely Russian disinformation. Now, remember, this was happening, and this USA Today article doesn't point that out yet. Let's continue. Caution is warranted. Twitter debated what to do about the New York Post story. Twitter removed links to the tweets linking the story, marking them as unsafe, and blocked the ability to send the story in direct messages. The Twitter team said that Hunter Biden's laptop material fell under its, quote, hacked materials policy, unquote. It never was hacked material. We knew that. It was not hacked. What it was material that was in a laptop that was given to a repair person who, through his regular course of action, downloaded the contents of the hard drive and then immediately contacted the FBI. The FBI didn't do anything with it until all of a sudden it splashed onto the front pages of newspapers, and suddenly the FBI went, subpoenaed, and retrieved the laptop. By that time, the repairman had provided the hard drive to other people, including Rudy Giuliani, working with the Trump campaign. So just bringing you up to date. There were problems within Twitter management. They raised concerns. Quote, I'm struggling to understand the policy basis for marking this as unsafe. This, according to Trenton Kennedy, a Twitter communications official. Kennedy advised that the company say it is waiting to understand whether the New York Post story is the result of hacked material. And then Brandon Borman says, quote, can we truthfully claim this is part of the policy, unquote. He's the former vice president of global communications. He asked that in an email. Jim Baker, deputy counsel for Twitter, replied, caution is warranted because it is reasonable to assume that materials reported in the story were hacked. A Democrat congressman, Representative Ro Khanna of California, whose district includes Silicon Valley, reached out to a top Twitter executive with concerns the decision to block the story violated First Amendment principles. Ro Khanna may be a real Democrat. He certainly has shown it over the years. I disagree with his politics, but at least he understands the Constitution. Since a $44 billion takeover of Twitter at the end of October, Musk has been trying to find a way to bring more money in. This is kind of a cynical viewpoint from USA Today, in my opinion. In November, Twitter briefly offered verified checks through an $8 per month Twitter Blue subscription and has discussed other ways to attract advertisers, such as relaunching short-form video platform Vine. Musk has gutted the staff through mass layoffs. Financial pressure comes after Musk saddled Twitter with $13 billion in debt to refinance the deal, which meant the company must pay more than $1 billion annually in interest alone, according to the New York Times. Wedbush Securities analyst Daniel Ives called Taibbi's Twitter thread A Twitter circus show with Musk using his new ownership and his showmanship to create as much political noise as possible to drum up engagement on the platform, which has foundered in recent years. Quote, at the end of the day, there are 44 billion reasons that Musk needs to increase engagement on Twitter. This will go down as the most overpaid M&A transaction in the history of tech, and I think Musk realizes the challenges ahead. Jared Holt, senior research manager at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, wrote it's common practice for political campaigns to complain to social media companies, and that Taibbi offered no evidence that Twitter gave the Biden campaign special treatment. We already know that major social media companies debate internally about their moderation policies and are inconsistent with applying those decisions. So, what exactly is new about Taibbi's revelations? I would argue almost nothing so far. Well, that's only because, counselor, you operate in a vacuum. It means an awful lot to an awful lot of people that suddenly their commentary on Twitter just vanishes, or that a news story that was proven correct in subsequent investigation was spiked because Twitter and Facebook and Google decided that it was possibly they found some pretense to keep the story out of the public eye. It looks like electioneering to me. That's what it looks like to me. That's just my opinion. So on November 7th, Musk tweeted a recommendation to vote for a Republican Congress, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, this puts it firmly in the political purvey. In a November 25th tweet, Musk confirmed that he would support Ron DeSantis, a Republican. Twitter also invited right-wing accounts back onto the platform under Musk, including former President Donald Trump. Trump was later banned from the platform in January of 2021 due to risks he would incite further violence following the January 6th attack, etc. Republicans seized on the material as proof that Twitter sought to hide a story unfavorable to President Biden ahead of the election. Do you think that's true? Yes or no? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. What do you think? We're learning in real time how Twitter colluded to silence the truth about the Hunter Biden laptop story just days before the 2020 presidential election. This according to House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. He voted Republicans will get answers for the American people when they take control of the House next year. We will see, won't we? Democrats said there was no story. Here is the big reveal. U.S. Representative Ted Lieu of California said Twitter got complaints from lots of folks, including the Biden campaign, the Trump White House, and your cousin's friend. Sometimes Twitter listened, and sometimes it didn't. But once again, Buck Sexton sees things a bit differently. I will share some of his comments coming up in just a couple of moments. What are yours? What are your comments on this? Is Elon Musk indeed giving us smoking gun evidence that there was collusion with regards to the 2022 election and the 2020 election? This time not from Russians, but this time from social media, this time from mainstream media? There's a good case for that too, and we'll get to all of it as we continue here on the Wells Report. Thanks for joining us today. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number, 817-379-2172. We bring you the news. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We make commentary. We debate. It's what we do here on the Wells Report, and we hope that you enjoy it. If you do, please support this broadcast. Send it to your friends. If you find any value in it at all, subscribe. Subscribe to the broadcast. Give us a thumbs up or a like or any of those things. Those things matter, by the way. It means a lot to us. And if indeed you'd like to support the Wells Report with a financial contribution, then go to patreon.com/The Wells Report, patreon.com/The Wells Report, and do so. I spent an awful lot of time in my radio career supporting public broadcasting. I took part in a lot of those fundraising events. I never thought that I'd ever be doing it for myself, ever. This is the Wells Report. And so what we're doing is we're going through some of the reporting involved in this Elon Musk Twitter bias story that is pretty serious here. And in the intervening time between these decisions being made by Twitter and Facebook and Google and so on, we have learned an awful lot about this particular laptop. And it turns out to be authentic. And that brings the FBI into question, and more about that coming up in just a couple of moments. Buck Sexton says, we've learned so far from journalist Matt Taibbi with the Twitter files that a compilation of emails from inside Twitter show the company was at the highest level, according to Buck Sexton, deeply partisan and became a ruthless tool of left-wing censorship on a range of key issues and critical election moments. And once again, this is Buck Sexton's opinion. Obviously, it's biased, so just consider it for what it's worth. Most famously, there was Twitter's suppression of the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story. The justification from social media shutting that story down was it never made sense, and now we can see that they knew it too. The act of pure election meddling had nothing to do with hacked materials. It had everything to do with Democrats gaining power. It was dishonest. It was bad faith. It may have well thrown them the 2020 election, according to Buck Sexton. But the Twitter files are still in their opening act. Matt Taibbi and Elon Musk have made it clear there's a whole range of internal documents that will soon be shared with the public, and the Democrats may face a reckoning that stretches all the way to the White House. What will the next batch? And already Buck Sexton is using the word Twittergate. Just call it the Twitter files or the bias story or something. But Twittergate, can we get away from that, please? All right, so here we go. Shadow banning will be the likely target, according to Buck Sexton. This process is where Twitter, under its previous woke management, used to dramatically limit the reach of certain users. In essence, disfavored conservatives who challenged the consensus on, say, COVID-19 mandates or election rigging would be blocked from reaching their own audience. This was among the most pernicious, underhanded maneuvers at Twitter, as it created an appearance of free and open debate without risking the backlash of actual suspension. That, I think, happened to me. I think Twitter did that with me, and I'm slowly recovering, in case you're wondering. It was demoralizing for anyone trying to make their case in the public square and found themselves shouting at a proverbial empty room, no matter how many followers they had. And according to Buck Sexton, it was done on purpose to aid the left. Do you agree with any of this? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. There will also be further Twitter files drops that show certain high-profile individuals or topics were specifically targeted for shadow banning or even suspension, based solely on whether they were upsetting or disadvantageous to Democrats. And this almost certainly will include direct communications between the Biden White House and Twitter officials. Is it all partisan politics? Or is this something that actually does threaten democracy? This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. And so now we have Elon Musk opening up the corporate communications of Twitter. And there is more to come. And the very eclectic Elon Musk promises there will be many smoking guns. By the way, according to Buck Sexton, Mr. Musk has all the receipts. The Twitterati never expected that Elon Musk would buy the company. So it didn't occur to them to hide their thoughts until it was too late. A vast trove of truth and probably bright red line violations of the constitutions are contained in the files that Elon Musk has at his disposal, according to Buck Sexton. We know there's more coming, and while the Democrat-aligned news media has thus far laughably ignored the story, the internet has been on fire with Twitter malfeasance for days. And speaking of the aforementioned, mainstream media. This from Fox News. Critics are now calling out the mainstream media for failing to cover the Elon Musk release of information regarding Twitter censorship, especially of the Hunter Biden laptop story just weeks before the 2020 presidential election. The major Sunday shows on ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN devoted a total of 7 seconds to the story, prompting Twitter CEO Elon Musk to sound off on the overwhelming silence. Quote, "I think those people should be looking in the mirror and wondering why they were being deceptive. Why did they deceive the American public? And instead of trying to redirect blame to Matt Taibbi, they should be accepting responsibility themselves for not being truthful to the American public." I agree. The mainstream media needs to be truly questioning their motives as we speak. Now, they may be so far gone that it doesn't matter. But when it gets so bad that even CNN begins to realize they have a problem, and they start ending their commitments to all kinds of people that worked to make CNN the leftist news network. And when they're trying at this particular moment to try to find some middle ground and failing at it, frankly, but they're still working on trying to get it done. It seems that ABC, CBS, CNN, NBC would start looking down that trail themselves, and they had better start doing it. They truly should. And I agree with Elon Musk. They should be looking in the mirror and questioning their motives. MSNBC devoted 3 minutes of coverage. CNN covered it for 10 minutes over the weekend. Fox News contributor Joe Concha said all the news outlets should want to fully cover the story transparently in order to preserve American democracy. Remember, that's what all these news outlets were doing. They were talking about how we must save democracy. They were talking about Donald Trump. But all the while they're talking about trying to save democracy, they're refusing to do their job, to actually report the news as it lays on the table, choosing to play politics instead. Concha went on to highlight liberal media outlets' double standard for viewing the Twitter under its previous leadership as an example of truth and a deterrent of misinformation, but now failing to cover the censorship that occurred. In other words, they aided and abetted misinformation. This is by far one of the most egregious examples of an industry doing something that was completely and totally wrong and unethical that we have ever seen, said Concha. He's correct. It's as bad as anybody has ever seen it. It's as bad as it could possibly be. He argued Musk is viewed as a threat amid his fight for free speech. Musk claimed in a tweet on the platform that the platform, Twitter, interfered in elections under previous leadership. But he asserted that Twitter will be more effective, transparent, and even-handed going forward. Wow. Let's see. Eva Fox, Claudius Nero's Legion, Twitter has shown itself to be not safe for the past 10 years and has lost users' trust. The past team of trust and safety is a disgrace. It doesn't have any right to judge what is being done now. They had a chance, but they sold their souls to a corporation. Elon Musk replies, exactly. The obvious reality, as long-term users know, is that Twitter has failed in its trust and safety for a very long time and has interfered in elections. Twitter 2.0 will be more effective, transparent, and even-handed. Fox and Friends' Steve Doocy, the morning show there, agreed that some Americans may have voted differently had the media fully reported the Hunter Biden laptop story, calling confirmation of the censorship a smoking gun. Did it change the outcome of the election? We don't know for sure, but we do know that there have been polls that have shown that had people known about the Hunter Biden laptop story and how Joe Biden may or may not have been involved ultimately, and the Biden family, it could have changed their vote. Yeah, that's vaporous. That is vaporous. We will see. We will see. Doocy suggested the mainstream media didn't actually care about Hunter Biden. Their goal was to do whatever it took to get Joe Biden into the White House. Do you agree? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Co-host Ainsley Earhart added that the media was now failing to cover Elon Musk's Twitter files because they want to keep the story hidden. They can't. They simply can't. It's too big now. And Mark Greer covers it with one statement. The mainstream media is all in. They have no more cards to play. That's correct. And so what they have to do is they have to do that walk of shame away from the big political card table after losing everything. And the chips they played weren't monetary. The chips they played are credibility. And those are hard-earned and easily lost. A lot of times you can lose your credibility over nothing you said or did. It can just happen. Hard-earned, easily lost. Ainsley Earhart said they don't want anyone to know what happened to Twitter. They don't want to know that they were censoring articles that could have changed the election results. Co-host Pete Hegseth, who's kind of a firebrand and, a bomb thrower, said, why would they tattle on their buddies? Conscious said the liberal media outlets are doing a disservice by ignoring the news that Hunter Biden was censored, the Hunter Biden story was censored, and the possible implications around President Biden's involvement. They are failing the American people. And they most assuredly are. They most assuredly are. There's another group of people that have similar problems. And that would be CNN. Now, this is by Dean Obadiah. And Mr. Obadiah is a leftist commentator. Okay, so believe me, this is very much a biased report. But take a look at how Mr. Obadiah is trying to sanitize, rewrite, and, oh, by the way, misdirect or misinform you, since that's the term of art these days. Elon Musk is apparently trying his hand at creating a major media story by the release of what he calls the Twitter files, which include internal Twitter documents from October of 2020 showing the social media company's executives debating whether to allow postings on the platform of a New York Post article about a laptop Hunter Biden reportedly owned. Mr. Obadiah, CBS News has announced, after 2 years of working on the story, that Hunter Biden's laptop was indeed Hunter Biden's laptop. You're starting your opinion piece here by being out of date. As CNN reported, Musk's release on Friday pointed to tweets by journalist Matt Taibbi, who was provided with emails that largely corroborated what was already known about the incident. But the Twitter story that demands coverage is not about something that happened more than 2 years ago, and this is where he tries to change the paradigm. Mr. Obadiah says, no, The Twitter story that actually demands coverage is not about something that happened more than 2 years ago. Obviously, graft and corruption, or at least the possibility of graft and corruption from the laptop of one of the people involved in that graft and corruption, that's not really the big story because it's 2 years old. No. The big story is that since Musk took control in October, there's been an unprecedented spike in hate speech, as well as a resurgence of ISIS-linked accounts. The New York Times detailed in an article published Friday, citing findings from the Center for Countering Digital Hate, the Anti-Defamation League, and other groups studying online platforms. Yeah, this is not about Hunter Biden's laptop and the fact that the president of the United States, while vice president of the United States, may have been involved in an influence buying scandal. Oh, it has nothing to do with that. No. This is about hate speech. And this is a CNN columnist and commentator. It's amazing what they think will distract from what is the obvious story. They even say so. Dean Obadiah says so. He says, no, that's not the big story. The big story is hate speech on Twitter. Yeah. Really? You know, Twitter before had absolutely no problem whatsoever with a Taliban account, all the while keeping Donald Trump off the platform. Sorry, Dean, that is not going to fly. That is absolutely not going to fly. Yeah, Elon Musk's Twitter is helping to normalize a neo-Nazi. Uh-huh. Yeah, you're missing the boat, man. See, that's what I mean. You know, it's little things like that. Dean Obadiah is trying to carry the water for the left under a circumstance that's just plain indefensible. Twitter colluded with Democrats to warp political opinion and public opinion just before the 2020 election. And what have I told you about propaganda? What have I told you about propaganda? It's not what you add to a story. It's what you leave out. It's how you try to use a particular circumstance to misdirect. Looking at the chat room, Isaac Tate has made an appearance. He said, didn't you decide not to cover the January 6th hearing? How is your decision different from a private company like Twitter's decision to suppress the story? First of all, the FBI did not come to me and say that the January 6th committee hearings were very likely Russian disinformation. Further, the FBI didn't come to me every week with the same message. They didn't do any of that. They did with Twitter and Facebook and Google. So the government wasn't in contact with me making that decision. That decision was made by me as an individual journalist after watching the opening parts of the January 6th and waiting for the rebuttal that never came. And it never came, and it never came, and it never came. And once again, I was calling for exactly what Republican leader Kevin McCarthy is now calling for: the rest of the information. And I was also telling you this: the January 6th committee would have been able to do actual, honest-to-goodness, really good work that may or may not have damaged Donald Trump. All they had to do was put the entire truth out there. It's not hard to do. Just put the truth out there. Let the American people decide. What was wrong with the January 6th committee and what invalidated it, in my view, from serious coverage was not the January 6th happened and so on and so forth. I saw President Donald Trump's speech. I covered it. In no way, shape, or form did he send a mob over to the Congress to stop the proceedings. But that's what was being reported by the January 6th committee. That was also what was being reported by the impeachment committee. It was so outlandish that even noted leftist bomb thrower Gerald Nadler said, we got to let the president talk on this. We've got to hear his side of the story, or no one's going to believe us. And so I was ahead of Gerald Nadler. It was unbelievable then. The January 6th committee is unbelievable now. And when the January 6th committee data comes out after January, I assure you that I will cover that story like a blanket, because there will be a story instead of a public relations propaganda piece. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. So now what we have here is we have more information coming from Twitter. And we are hoping that indeed we will see more of that story. Now, I want to point out that as a part of this broadcast, I have pointed out that there have been people on the left in both the January 6th committee story, somebody asking me about my coverage of that story, and the people from the Twitter story. There were people aboard Twitter that were having real ethical problems with the decisions being made. But what happened is that there were people that in this Twitter story, the realization is that it's who you contacted at Twitter regarding a particular flagged story or not, or a particular flagged tweet or not, whether there was action taken. There were overwhelming numbers of leftist operatives in Twitter that acted to the benefit of Joe Biden. There were moments when Twitter reacted to the Trump administration or the Trump campaign. But what I'm missing here, and why I'm bringing this up, is I'm trying to figure out what exact tweets did Donald Trump try to get squashed? What were those exact tweets that Donald Trump was trying to get squashed? Why did he want them squashed? That's part of the story that's so far missing. I'm hoping that Elon Musk is going to share that. Now, if this turns out to be nothing more than Twitter is biased left and it's a leftist hit piece, then I will make the same decisions I made with everybody else that tries to put a lynch mob together. But I'm thinking that Elon Musk is actually looking for transparency. Neither of the impeachment hearings, neither of the impeachment investigations done by done against President Trump by the House, by the Democrat-controlled House, made any pretense of having a fair and truthful investigation or a result. It was a partisan witch hunt each time. And the January 6th committee hearing was likewise a partisan witch hunt. And oh, by the way, remember that in the impeachments, they were making these pronouncements about charges, none of them went anywhere. Because in the hard, cold reality of honest to goodness law, you actually have to have due process. And there was no due process. I'm waiting for due process in all of this stuff having to do with Twitter. I'm waiting to see whether or not I'm only getting one side of the story. And when I see that I'm only getting one side of the story, I will point it out and will very likely contact Elon Musk and say, Mr. Musk, what about the tweets that Donald Trump wanted to be squelched? What about those? Tell the story. You see, the thing about the January 6th committee, they could not stand up and say that we want to be transparent. And the reason they couldn't say it was because they weren't being transparent. Communications between Nancy Pelosi and the other people that were running the show when the House of Representatives, they didn't want an equal and fair story. What they wanted to do was they wanted to get Donald Trump. And all of this was just an extension of it. Now what we see something that's completely different. Let's divorce that from the January 6th thing. Let's divorce that from my editorial decision making. Let's get back to what the actual story is. The actual story in this is that a major social media organization charged with at least participating in First Amendment free speech saw fit to censor that free speech. And now we're actually seeing how they did it and why they did it and the struggles that they went through while they were doing it. Not everybody is a villain in this piece. The end result was censorship. There were good questions being asked on the other side of that censorship decision. But at the end of it, censorship won. There's also a component that has to be dealt with here regarding the FBI. When it comes to the Hunter Biden laptop story, the FBI had the laptop for a couple of years and did nothing with it. Or they did something with it. They actually looked through it. They found the same things that CBS News allowed an independent analyst to see, and he came up with things that said, yeah, this is an absolutely confirmed Hunter Biden laptop. The FBI didn't know that information? They did, which means that everything they did afterwards, after that revelation, was political warpage of federal law enforcement. And there's no way to hide that. And there's no way to escape it. And it all had to do with the 2020 election. The case is growing. We'll see where it goes. This is the Wells Report. Back for hour number 3 in just a moment. Again, thanks very much for joining us. Stick around. There's more to talk about, including Donald Trump. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We bring you the news. We report honestly and fairly. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. I make commentary. That's not the news. That's just my opinion, just as valuable as yours. So please share it. In short, we debate. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. That's what you have here on the Wells Report. We do it 3 hours every day, live from 2 until 5 p.m., Monday through Friday in the Central Time Zone. If you're watching on Rumble, and if you're watching on Patreon, and soon Substack. I'm working on Substack. If you are watching, that is a recorded broadcast. This is a recorded broadcast. We did this earlier today, and I certainly wish that you could have something to do with it. So if you'd like to send me an email, here's the address, thewellsreport@frontier.com. The Wells Report at frontier.com. Please put in the subject line, please put the name of the platform you're watching on. All right. So we've been talking a little bit about about Elon Musk and Twitter. We spent some time earlier today talking a little bit about the Supreme Court of the United States, what they're hearing, what they're arguing, and what they're not going to hear. Go back earlier in the show and figure that stuff out. But Twitter is an amazing circumstance. Last hour was very, very good. And I certainly hope that you spend a little bit of time visiting with what we discussed on that particular hour. Okay? Former President Donald Trump faced rebuke from officials of both political parties after calling for the termination of parts of the Constitution over his lie that the 2020 election was stolen. This, by the way, is Associated Press. Remember the part where I point out fact and bias? Okay, time to point out bias. First of all, what's happened in the mainstream media regarding the 2020 election is that when anybody brings up anything having to do with something that is contrary to the mainstream media orthodoxy, that the 2020 election was the fairest, most perfect election ever, they call you a liar. And they continue to do it. They refer to unfounded claims. They refer to outright lies, blah, 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 blah. And they did it again here. Former President Donald Trump faced rebuke from officials in both parties after calling for the termination of parts of the Constitution over his lie that the 2020 election was stolen. You know, they could be real journalists simply by saying that he was rebuked by both parties calling for the termination of parts of the Constitution over the parts of the Constitution and his assertion that the 2020 election was stolen. All you have to do is change over his lie to his assertion that. Voila. You have real journalism. Why AP doesn't do that? Well, maybe it's just because there's no real journalism at the Associated Press. I realize that that's an awful statement, but the thing about it is that, and I know it's not even mostly true, but the Associated Press, like every other news organization in the United States, needs to get back to the news instead of their political punditry. They've got to get over it. President Trump, who announced last month that he was running for president again, made the claim over the weekend that on his Truth social media platform, quote, "A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution," he wrote. "Our great founders did not want and would not condone false and fraudulent elections." This was immediately turned into the President of the United States calling for the suspension of the Constitution and rules and regulations and articles. That's because apparently there are two reasons here. Okay. Reason number one, these people are looking to be able to report anything that they can that will besmirch Donald Trump's reputation or mischaracterize what he's saying. Now, look, before I go any further, what drives me up the flipping wall about the press efforts around the Biden administration, not so much about Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a walking, talking gaffe machine. I told you that he was a walking, talking gaffe machine, and he is a walking, talking gaffe machine. He makes big mistakes all the time. There's all kinds of cleanup going on. But what drives me crazy about the cleanup going on is the absence of, well, President Biden made an error when he said. And what they try to do is they try to take what he said and spin it. Up to and including having somebody translate for the president. Well, he said this, but what he meant was, no. I'm not going to try to translate for President Trump, but I remember seeing the headlines. My God, President Trump calls for the suspense of the Constitution. And I read the statement, and I saw something completely different in it. So I'm not translating for President Trump. I just want you to hear what I heard in the statement. A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Now, what I'm talking about here is if indeed his assertions about the 2020 elections are true, then a massive fraud of that type not only allows for, but requires the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. In other words, if Donald Trump is right about the 2020 election, then rules, regulations, and articles found in the Constitution and elsewhere would have to have been terminated already. In other words, his assertion that the 2020 election was stolen means that there was a willful warpage of the laws, rules, regulations, even those in the Constitution, to make that theft possible. He's not calling for the suspense of the Constitution and rules and regulations and so on and so forth. That's not. And this, to me, this is slipshod journalism here. Once again, you believe what you want to believe. If you believe that the president called for the cessation of the Constitution, go with God. I'm okay with it. But I didn't, when I first read this, I'm good. What are they talking about? A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules and regulations and articles, not by him, but by the people perpetrating the fraud. Doesn't that make sense to anybody but me? Let me go now to the chat room, because I'm really sure that that there will be a lot to be said here. Hopefully, I didn't lose too many people here. To me, what he was saying. Okay, here we go. To me, what he was saying, that those on the left have so perverted our system of rules and regulations, including the constitutions, that they should just do away with the Constitution, implying, of course, if you're not going to follow it, then why have it? That's pretty much what I'm saying. Let's see. Poker Monkey says that Trump is trolling the left and always makes their brains explode. He goes on to say the Democrats left have used the Constitution for toilet paper for many years, not just them. Let's talk a little bit about what's that guy's name? Oh, yeah, Mitch McConnell. Okay. Now all of a sudden they care about the Constitution? Exactly. That's also something to keep in mind. Trump is right. The 2020 election was stolen, especially in Pennsylvania, just like the election is in Arizona is being stolen from Kari Lake. Okay. That's what you believe, Poke. Okay. We're not saying that here. We're not saying that here. We're waiting. And I'll tell you why we're waiting. I'm waiting for more information. What we have is we have the reported agenda. We have the reported story. And just like the Hunter Biden laptop story, where over 50 former and current intelligence officers said that this has all the markings of Russian disinformation when the FBI knew better because they had the damn thing. All this stuff will come out. You just have to wait for it. What I'm doing, I'm reporting the facts. The president said, quote, a massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Our great founders did not want, would not condone false and fraudulent elections, unquote. This has been turned into by the mainstream media and, of course, Democrats and Republicans that he's called for the cessation of the Constitution. They're trying to portray him as an old man who's lost his mind. I don't believe that's the case, but that's just my opinion. So I report that. And then what I do is I come over here and I say, this is what I read. What about you? I read something completely different. It's almost like President Trump knows he's out of office, but the people reporting what he just said, they don't know he's out of office. So then we go, yeah, Whistler's mother, yeah. Drive-by media. Well, yeah. It's not journalism, it's 100% agenda. Correct. John says it. It's true. And that's what we have for agenda for news. I'm trying to do something about that. I'm having limited success. I mean, I successfully point out what's real and what isn't real in the day's news. I mean, I'm successful at that. I'm just wondering how long I can do this. You know, I'm not making a living doing it. How long can I do this? And if I stop, who's going to do it? Let's see. Let's go back to misreporting Trump statements. Inject bleach. Good people on both sides, etc. Correct. Absolutely correct. And when you play those cards, you know, they're played. You can't unring a bell. In some and Poker Monkey talks about some of the case law, or not case law, but some of the anecdotal information surrounding the 2020 election. I got that. But President Trump is certainly being castigated by both sides. Why? The Democrats don't want him running for the presidency. The Republicans don't want him running for the presidency because Donald Trump is a disruptor. He disrupts the political status quo. And that involves the Republicans too. So remember, you've got President Trump here. You have the Democrat Party honestly, absolutely doing anything they can to destroy the guy. The Republican Party trying to destroy the guy without it making it look like they're trying to destroy the guy. So they're not honestly trying to destroy Donald Trump. They're dishonestly trying to destroy Donald Trump. And then there's the media. The media is doing everything they can, pulling what they can from the Republican Party. Mitch McConnell saying, my God, that was a terrible thing that Trump said. To the Democrats whose hair are on fire. And so those are the three issues that Donald Trump has to deal with. The media, the Democrat Party, and the Republican Party, all out to get him. And that's what you have to keep in mind when you hear them report. What did Donald Trump say about his statement? Well, The Hill covered it. And I will share that with you in a moment. This is the Wells Report. Back with more coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Was checking on the Twitter feed of Elon Musk. So many interesting posts on Twitter these days. Yes, Elon, there certainly are. We're keeping our eyes on it. Okay, so President Trump, according to The Hill, insists he does not want to terminate the Constitution. He responds to broad backlash after he said over the weekend the rules and laws should be disregarded so he can return to the White House. That is not what he said. That's not what he said. Now, that's my opinion. Like I said, I reported the Associated Press saying, my God, he called for the termination of the Constitution. Okay. Believe whatever you choose. I didn't read it that way, but you can take with it, go with it as you see fit. Here's what President Trump said. Remember, I'm reporting the news, okay? President Trump, in a pair of posts on Truth Social, responded to the fallout from his comments on Saturday that the 2020 election should be redone or he should be put back in office. The former president weighed in after internal Twitter communications showed company officials decided to limit the spread of posts about allegations against Hunter Biden, President Biden's son, in the closing weeks of the 2020 campaign. Here's what the president said, quote, "The fake news is actually trying to convince the American people that I said I wanted to terminate the Constitution. This is simply more disinformation and lies, all caps, just like Russia, 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 all caps, and all of the other hoaxes and scams, all caps." He wrote that this afternoon, saying that the steps must be taken immediately to right the wrong. In a separate all capitalized posts, Trump wrote that if an election is irrefutably fraudulent, it should go to the rightful winner or at a minimum be redone. Where open and blatant fraud is involved, there should be no time limit for change. Everybody's entitled to his opinion, even President Trump. Okay? The comments drew pushback, including from key GOP figures. I must tell you that I think that everyone that serves in public office, everyone that aspires to serve or serve again, should make it clear that we will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. This was former Vice President Mike Pence. Well, yeah, that's already understood. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who defeated a Trump-backed challenger in November, said suggesting the termination of the Constitution is not only a betrayal of our oath of office, it's an affront to the Republic. That would be true, but I don't think that's what he said. Trump has for years claimed the 2020 election was stolen, this from The Hill, and that Hunter Biden colluded with his father over business dealings, although there's no proof of either. His calls for the Constitution to be ignored so he could return to power marked a new level of incendiary rhetoric. This is where The Hill becomes The Hill. The White House condemned Trump's comments in a statement of their own. Here's what President Biden said, quote, "The Constitution brings the American people together regardless of party, and elected leaders swear to uphold it. Attacking the Constitution and all it stands for is an anathema to the soul of our nation and should be universally condemned," unquote. There. That's the story. So, Donald Trump is here. Mainstream media is here. Republican Party here. Everybody in this circle hates Donald Trump, wants to get rid of him. What does Donald Trump have? Somewhere around 74 million voters. Donald Trump, 74 million voters. Democrats, Republicans, mainstream media. Do you think that Donald Trump could actually defeat the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, and the mainstream media with his 74 million voters? It may take him being, let me try that. It may take him being a third party guy, huh? This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. Arthur Davenport said, unfortunately, in his statement, Trump was using a future tense. So you either believe he doesn't understand the proper use of tense, or you accept his statement as originally stated. Okay, let's take a look at the original statement. Work with me on this one, Arthur. Work with me on this. A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Okay. The subject of the statement, the subject of the sentence, God, I hate doing this. You know, this is not me trying to spin what the president says, but this statement, and you know what? I'm going to start with that first. Okay. I was going to go through the sentence because I have a pretty good command of English and grammar and all of that. But let me get back to something that is more cogent. Okay. I don't know whether I'm going to vote for Donald Trump in 2024. I don't even know that he's going to be, well, he said he's going to be a candidate, but I don't know that he's going to be a candidate on the ballot. Okay. I don't know whether I'm going to vote for him or not. I'm going to vote for the most American, most constitutional presidential candidate running for office in 2024, whoever that is. Okay? And I said this about Donald Trump. If Donald Trump is going to win in 2024, if he wants to regain the presidency, he was going to have to do some things that he hasn't been able to do. One, he's going to have to stop talking about himself. He's going to have to start talking about the people of the United States. In short, he's going to have to start acting like a president. He's going to have to start communicating like a president. Say what you want about Barack Obama. Say what you want about George W. Bush. Say what you want about even Joe Biden. But when they read a statement, it is very carefully considered. It is very carefully considered and very carefully worded. The President of the United States, after creating, or his staff after creating one of those statements, reads it, puts it in his vernacular, and then reads it word for word after checking with all the people who wrote the statement in the first place, all the questions he needs so that he knows what he's talking about. Okay? Donald Trump doesn't do that. Donald Trump needs to know, okay, Mr. Trump, President Trump, that's what presidents do. If you want to be the president, you need to start doing that. And he doesn't do it. He will say things that can be misconstrued. And that takes, and once again, we already know that the mainstream media will willfully misconstrue what President Donald Trump says. And that's exactly what they've done here. They've willfully misconstrued it. And that became the story. And politicians just gathered it right up and started running with it. Mike Pence, Mitch McConnell, my God, the president called for the cessation of the Constitution. He didn't say anything of the kind. So now let's get back to the language. Okay? Let's get back to the language. A massive fraud of this type is the subject of the sentence. Fraud. That fraud allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. If he had wanted to say if he wanted to suspend the Constitution, what he would have said was, this is a fraud that requires the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. That's not what he said. He said that a fraud of this type allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Well, okay. Who does it allow? This is when I said the people that are writing this article don't realize that President Trump is not the president. The people that are actually in charge of the country right now are the people that a fraud of this type allows for the termination of. In other words, he's not talking about himself. He's talking about the people in charge of the fraud. Now, was Donald Trump in charge of the fraud? No. Who was in charge of the fraud? Well, and I don't know because I haven't really talked to President Trump about this, but I'm assuming that these arch villains of the left. Okay? So if you look at the structure of the sentence, a massive fraud of this type, parentheses, purported by leftist villains, allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Who does it allow? Once again, the leftist villains, not Donald Trump. That's English. That's straightforward, plain English. But what we also saw was the willful misreporting of that statement. Now, if you happen to know an English professor who wants to give me, can explain, or is at odds with my explanation about what that sentence actually says, have him call me, 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. And Arthur says, by using the word allows, it suggests that he was talking about the future. Yeah, but he's not talking about himself. The implied agent that would call for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles is missing in the statement. It is implied that the people who perpetrated the fraud of this type would be those agents of change in that particular direction. And that's not him. That's what's missing in the statement. And once again, propaganda is what you leave out, not what you put in. Donald Trump's not talking about himself. He's not talking about saying, I'm going to go do this. He doesn't have any problem talking about what he did and what he's going to do. If he was going to do that, he'd say, I'm going to suspend the Constitution and get back in office. No, he's not. No, you're missing the point, Arthur. One more time, Arthur. A massive fraud of this type is the subject. A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination by who? The authors of the massive fraud of this type. In order for you to believe that Donald Trump was actually talking about himself, he would have to be the author of the massive fraud he's referring to. And that's not what he's saying. Ta-da! And then Arthur says, what is obvious? John David, he's trolling. Bingo! I don't know. No, really, Arthur, that's it. You got to go back through it. You remember Mr. Katie's English class? We took English with Mr. Katie. We took that together at least once. Come on, man. That's what that says. That's what I read. I read this and I'm going, what are these people talking about? He's calling for the cessation of the Constitution. That's baloney. But then everybody ran with it. And to me, this is the point that has to be talked about. Okay? First of all, once again, the mainstream media reported something errantly, in my view. And everybody, Republicans and Democrats, immediately jumped all over it, sustaining what was misreporting by the mainstream media. This is Associated Press. I just read Associated Press. I mean, most news articles start with either the New York Times or the Associated Press. This is the Associated Press. This is the root of this story. And they all ran with it. And it created this echo chamber thing again, where it took on a life of its own. And I'm surprised. I am surprised that The Hill even reported what Donald Trump said afterwards. I couldn't find that from anybody else, but The Hill reported it. They said President Trump said he wasn't calling for the cessation of the Constitution. He wasn't. He just wasn't. And by the way, there's also something else about this. Okay. Go back to the statement. A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the constitutions. Constitution. That's the first part of the statement. Then he said this: our great founders did not want and would not condone false and fraudulent elections. So how do those two statements go together? If he's calling for the end of the Constitution, if he's calling for the termination of the Constitution, then why does he evoke the founders who did not want nor would condone false and fraudulent elections? In order to report that President Trump was trying to suspend the Constitution or terminate the Constitution, they had to ignore the second part of his statement. Now, that's something they've done before. See what I mean? This is just dishonest. It's dishonest reporting. And what's bizarre about it? Am I the only one? Am I the only one that caught them red-handed doing it? Apparently so. Why am I the only one that caught them red-handed doing it? I'll tell you why. Because in the desperate urge of American universities and so on and so forth, the people that train these journalists, in their desperate urge to turn them all into very good little communist socialists, they forgot to explain how English works. This is simple. Now, getting back to my original point about Donald Trump, I don't know who is handling Donald Trump's communications. If it's Donald Trump, Mr. President, you need to stop handling your communications. You need to get somebody in there that knows exactly what you're trying to say and will help you say it, because you're blowing it. You are giving them on a silver platter the club that they are beating you over the head with. And you do it over and over and over again. Mr. President, I'm talking to Trump now. Joe Biden is a walking, talking gaffe machine. He constantly shoots himself in the foot and his buttocks and other portions of his anatomy. Sir, you're doing the same thing. You need to stop. You need to think before you say something. And by the way, that's a really good attribute for a president. You need to think before you say something. You have to be more careful. You have to think about, what is this idiotic media going to do with your next statement? And what you need to do is do what I do on this broadcast. I read the news, gave you the news. Then I tell you what I thought about it. And then I make absolutely sure that this is my opinion. If I was his communications director, what I would have had President Trump say on this is this: with a possible massive fraud of this type and magnitude, those responsible for that fraud would find themselves in a position where rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution, could be suspended to pull off the fraud. But that's not what he said. Well, that's what he said, but he didn't say it that cleanly. And that's the problem. That's why he's getting his butt kicked. I don't know who's handling his communications, but whoever it is, need to replace him. By the way, Mr. President, I'm not doing anything. And oh, by the way, I think I have a pretty good idea. I've got a pretty good handle on your communication patterns. It's kind of my job. I kind of been doing it for half a century. I sort of know what I'm talking about when it comes to what you need to do to communicate what you actually believe. A massive fraud perpetrated by leftist villains That kind of massive fraud perpetrated by those kinds of people could lead to the cessation of the Constitution and suspense of rules, regulations, blah, 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 blah. Real simple. That's a good statement, Mr. President. Instead of giving them, once again, the golden baseball bat to beat your head in with, sir. Now, after you make that statement, after you make the statement that archvillains created a massive fraud and to do that, they would now be able to, right? Then you can riff off that, but you made your policy statement. It's about communicating. This is the Wells Report. We'll have more communication coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Arthur Davenport, who's a high school buddy of mine. I mean, I've known the guy for the 50 years I was just discussing. Anyway, boy, Arthur, you're old, by the way. Anyway, Arthur hit right on the very crux of every point I'm trying to make by reporting this story about Donald Trump's statement regarding the Constitution. He said this: interesting how the interpretation of his statement differs. That's exactly my point. That is exactly my point. And it's also part of my point that the President Trump, needs to be more precise in his language. He needs to be more precise in his language, and he's not. When it comes to communicating with the people of the United States, President Donald Trump is sloppy. And he causes a lot of his own problems, just like this. Look, if the president wanted to suspend the Constitution and take power again, he'd say so. That's what Donald Trump would say. But he keeps trapping himself in these dumb statements that he doesn't need to make. He says things that are just... It's not that the things that he's saying are not the right things to say. It's the way he actually puts them out there that gives them the opportunity to interpret his comments. Just like Arthur's saying. He needs to make his communication, here comes a big word, he needs to make his communication far less ambiguous. Far less ambiguous. And so there you go. All right. Speaking of art, I'm not talking about Art Davenport. I'm talking about me. Because when I was going to high school with Arthur Davenport, I essentially was a performing arts high school student. I mean, acting, singing, dancing, music, all of these things. Okay. So every year, my family would gather around the television. We'd watch the Kennedy Center Honors. And they were handed out last night. Okay. And Gladys Knight was given a Kennedy Center honor. Gladys Knight was there. George Clooney was given one. Okay. George Clooney. Amy Grant received the Kennedy Center honors. Good gal. Tanya Leon. She's a Cuban-born conductor, composer, classical music aficionado. And she left Cuba for New York City in 1967 and co-founded the Dance Theater of Harlem. She became a teacher, a mentor, and a guru. Okay, she's in the New York. She is royalty in the New York arts scene. And then U2. Okay, they are now one of 244 musicians acknowledged by the Kennedy Center Honors. And they describe themselves as 4 scrappy Dublin punks. And I have to be honest with you, I'm not a real big fan of U2. U2 is like one of those groups that I went, meh, I don't get it. Right? And so I don't, because I just heard, I heard good musicianship and so on and so forth, but it wasn't, I mean, we're not listening to virtuosos here. We're just listening to a really good, tight rock band. And their choice of what they sing about is a little too political for me. So U2 sort of became the political rock band, and not so much. But that does explain why they got a Kennedy Center honor, and that's good. I have no problem with any of that. George Clooney, I've always enjoyed his work. He is our generation's Cary Grant. He is urbane and actually very good at what he does. And I appreciate him. Once again, our politics, they don't match. But I don't care. And George Clooney doesn't beat you over the head with his politics. And that's good. Gladys Knight, I had the joy of living in Las Vegas. I've met Gladys Knight on several occasions. She is as sweet and wonderful and fantastic as you think. And, she has an interesting past in Las Vegas, and I'm going to leave alone. But all I can say is that I have seen her for decades singing all the songs that she is known for with the same conviction and belief and joy that she sang them with the first time when she put them on records and made everybody in the United States that thought Gladys Knight and the Pips were fantastic, made all of that true. Okay, Gladys Knight, great gal. And I did not know, and do not know, either George Clooney, U2, or I've met Amy Grant. She's a great, nice gal. Or Tanya Leon, but I knew of her. Okay, so there you go. Let's see. Mark Greer says he was at U2's first Red Rocks concert. So what'd you think, Mark? Was it a great show? I mean, did you walk out of there saying, holy criminy cheese? I walked out of Garth Brooks saying that was the best show I ever saw. No answer? All right, that's all we got for today's edition of the Wells Report. Stick around. We'll do it again tomorrow. Not the same show, of course. Tomorrow's news tomorrow. Thanks very much for joining us. God bless you and yours, and we'll see you. All right. So there you go. Ta-da. It was a good show. It was the best show you ever saw. Was it the best rock show you ever saw? Yes or no, and why? Right? Because everybody that goes sees the Eagles, they say it's the best show they ever saw. I never saw the Eagles in person, but I saw them on TV. It was the best show I ever saw, except, well, hang on a second here. Let me see if I can answer this. Okay. Yeah. So there you go. So I had to take that call. So anyway, God bless you. Thanks very much, Mike, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mikey. And that's all I have for today. So I'm going to go ahead and go. Peace, love, joy, and I'll see you tomorrow.